Hello and welcome to this third part of the overview of the 3D World Studio package. In this video we'll look at the essentials of the 3D World Studio command set, all of the general tools that help you to produce your environment. Now if there's any part of the videos that I create that you want to skip, this is not the one to skip. This is going to explain all the tricks and principles that apply in many situations, the general situations. To begin, we'll load up a scene that I'm currently working on, the sports fiction scene, and we'll have a look and see that here we have lots of objects on the screen, and to work with all of these objects you need to know what all of the indicators mean and how to deal with grouping, selecting, reshaping, applying textures and scaling textures, working with entities, placing lights. These kind of actions are going to be indicated in and explained in this part of the tutorial. Now let's create a scene. Go back into the 4 views. To start with, we'll discuss the concept of grouping. We'll start by creating a solid box. We'll create one to the left and to the right, and we'll create a cylinder in the middle up here. Now we can see all of the objects are really tall because 3D World Studio remembers the size of the previously selected object. Now we can select all of the objects. Let's go into the 3D viewport and we can group them. To group the objects we can go to the tools menu and press the group button. Now when I select an individual object, it becomes a selection based upon its group, which I can then move around, rotate. Let's try that again. Rotate, and I can skew. More on rotation and skew in a moment. So I'll undo those actions. The undo key is, as per usual in many applications, Control Z. The redo key is in fact there is no redo in 3D World Studio. Oops. Anyway, so a word of warning, no redo button. So now if we want to edit one of these objects and apply an individual texture, how will we do that? Well, if you remember from the previous video, we can select the sub object mode pressing the X key on the keyboard. I can select one of its faces and I can pick a different texture and press the apply button to apply the texture. I can select a object in the group by going into the sub-object mode, selecting one of its sub-objects and pressing the Z key on the keyboard. Now the individual object is selected, which I can move independently and rotate independently, skew independently. I can also edit its control points, its vertices and edges. The object is still a member of the group. I can go into object select mode by pressing the Z key and select one of the other members, and the entire group has been selected. Now transformation. I will insert a box. I'll set its size down. By default we can move the object around by clicking the drag in. We can size the object by selecting one of its handles and dragging the handle. We can rotate the object by clicking once again to enter rotate mode. in rotate mode, all of the handles will be represented by a white circle, and we can drag the circle and rotate the object. The rotation of the object is indicated in the status bar. If you take a look, -20, -45, and here we have the original rotation. So if you look down there, you can see the relative rotation of what you are doing. 90 degrees will rotate it that way. We can rotate it in any of the views. Another way to quickly rotate an object, which I'll indicate more effectively using a interesting shaped group. Create U and select U and press Ctrl G to group. Now we can simply rotate this 90 degrees by pressing this button here, rotate Y, and our object is rotated about its center point. In the front view we can rotate X, which is actually rotated in the side view at its center point, and rotate its Z angle about its center point in the front view. We can also transform the object by going into the object menu, and we can enter a absolute angle and press the apply button. We can still transform the object with the window active. It doesn't go into modal mode. We will now take a look at the skew feature by creating a new object, and we'll drag a random object. Now we access the rotation mode by clicking once in the area of the highlighted object. We click again and we enter into the skew mode. We know that it's in skew mode when there is no control point at the corners of the selected object. If I hover over the control point, you get the double arrow sign on the mouse, which we can click and drag to skew the objects. One use for this feature is to align two linear objects together by joining them with a skewed center piece, which 3DO Studio will align to the grid. There. And our texture remains unskewed because texture space is according to the world settings. A note about the textures is that the amount of pixels will influence how large the textures are in 3DO Studio. So a texture of say 512 units at scale 1 would be the same size as a texture with 256 pixels at scale 2. Now we've seen the rotation, we've seen the skew, and we've seen how to duplicate. Let's take a look at another way to select objects. Before this point we've been selecting our objects in the 3D viewport, but you can also select them right here. This is done by clicking on the center point of each of the objects you require to be selected. If I create an object with an overlapping center point, you can more or less select the object behind it by clicking outside and clicking on the inside. 3DO Studio will favor the X point closest to the mouse cursor. You can also select using the Shift key and dragging a box around the selection. We can also shift select objects in the 3D viewport. I'll hold shift and I'll press the shift key with everything in view, get a better view. That casts a ray between all of the objects under the mouse. As I click the objects behind the mouse are selected also. Okay. Next, let's take a look at some of the general. To begin with, we'll look at a few operators that are available inside of the 3D World Studio environment. We can use the operators by using the toolbar. The first one we'll demonstrate is the carve tool. Now this is a binary operator, therefore we need more than one object to be created. I'll create this cube here to the right of the first cube. I will make this one slightly shorter, get a good view of it in 3D. This works by applying a difference Boolean operation on the unselected objects using the selected objects. In other words, it carves a shape according to the selected shape. We simply need to click the carve tool and the operation has been made. To see the operation in action, we delete the original tool, and here we see we have a new shape, a group of two brushes. You can carve away as much as you like, as long as you try to keep, undo, let's try that again here. Yeah, okay, move over. Yeah, so if you press the carve button, it'll also do it again. Let's carve a round shape over the top. The cylinder always faces you. Press the carve button. Now our shape has a groove, as if a giant mouth bit it. Anyway, so the carve tool can do many things. We're not going to go into too much detail about it right now. We just got to get through quite a number of basics here. You can also use the carve tool to bore holes through walls and ceilings. You simply create your object, use to carve the hole. All of the touching objects, all the objects that touch the object will be carved, and it's best to keep things aligned to the grid. I'm just working in pace here, not really paying much attention to my scale and my accuracy. I'm just demonstrating how the tool works, but it would be best advised to keep everything nicely aligned to the grid so that textures line up more easily and you have an easier life dealing with textures and forming new objects. So if I press the carve tool here, we have a hole in our shape which we can treat as a separate object and do all the things we can do with 3D World Studio's brush shapes. Next we have the hollow tool. The hollow tool is a shortcut for creating hollow shapes out of 3D World Studio's basic shapes. I'll create a new document to get everything defaulted, and I'll create a box in the center. Now if I fly into the box, all of the faces are facing outwards, so there's nothing in view when I'm inside of the box. But this is not the case when we press the hollow button. It will ask us for a parameter of how thick the wall is. Again, it's good to use scales according to the grid, which are multiples of 2. This enables you to align the textures nicely, which are also usually sized in multiples of 2. So I'll select the thickness of 8 and I'll press the OK button. Here we have a hollow shape which we can select as a singular object, or we can select aspects of the object pressing the X key and selecting with the mouse. We can select another texture. We can apply the texture to the inner wall and have the outer wall contain its own texture. We can also select one face, press Z and X and select the entire wall and have it have its own texture. Let's select something from another group of textures. Here we see both sides of this wall have been textured, including, I believe, the top. Okay, a word about optimization, a very brief word in fact. To optimize your game to help it to run as smoothly as possible, it is recommended to remove the faces that are never seen. To do so in 3DO Studio, we can simply enter into sub-object mode and click the face that we want to remove and press the delete key, and the face will be deleted. We can also restore the face by pressing the face where it is and pressing the Ctrl and R combination, and the face will be returned. But as you export with the face deleted, your DarkBASIC professional game will not load the deleted faces. Excellent. Okay, the next thing we'll do is we'll create a hollow wedge, demonstrating that this also works with the other primitives. We just create the wedge and we'll click the Make Hollow button, which is also available through the Tools menu. We'll fly inside, and here we see that this is quite a cool way to produce a triangular room. Now let's just create a little floor so I can navigate the screen more effectively. Doesn't matter about the size. Oops. Mouse isn't very accurate during capturing. Blame the mouse. Blame the mouse. Okay, so the floor is up there. Therefore I need to fly upwards. Now we can also make other shapes hollow. Here we have a hollow cone. Notice that although the cone is quite a complex shape, it still figured it out. It figured it out. Nice way to make a tent. Let's make an opening by pressing the X button followed by the Z button, select the object and press delete. We have an opening in a kind of tent. Let's have a look at this here. Looks quite thin, doesn't it? Yeah. Let's try to make a shape. This time we'll use an arch, and then we'll use, no, that's not a very good one to use. Let's do a cylinder. We'll use a larger thickness. We'll press the hollow button and press the thickness. Type in a thickness of 32. here we have a nice thick opening in the wall. Now the cylinder contains quite a different form compared to the other shapes. The actual subparts of the cylinder are, as you can see, if I go into wireframe mode, diagonal in form. The edges are diagonal, so you would need to go into the vertex editing mode and correct the look. Let's decrease the grid size of pressing the square bracket button, and we can kind of finish off the edge nicely. Next we'll look at the slice plane tool. The slice plane tool is best demonstrated with a box. It simply carves the box into two. It produces two objects on either side of a line that you drag with the mouse with the slice plane tool selected. So I'll drag a shape through the middle, and here we see we have two objects. I'll select it, the object again. It's always activated to the selected object, and I will draw a diagonal line. There we go. I'll create a few, oops, I've got to deselect. I've accidentally carved the floor, which actually brings me to my next point. It also works with unselected objects. When you create a series of objects, it will carve all of them, all of the objects that are intersected by your indication. As you can see here, we have lots of carved objects. Okay, the carve button will stay active until you deselect it, but generally if you want to carve an individual object in a scene, you just select it and carve it as you wish. The objects underneath will not be carved, only the selected object, unless no objects are selected. The next one will create a new, oops, unselect. We'll create a new box above the kind of floor we have, and we'll extrude a selected face. Now this is a face based tool, so we'll select this face here and extrude. It uses an absolute system, so we will enter an absolute value of say 128, and here we have an extrusion of the same object, and now the extrusion becomes a new object which we can extrude on its own as well. The extrusion is taking place, the extrusion is calculated on the normal, so it will extrude in the direction the face is facing, and again the objects that you create will become new ones. You'll still have the inner faces, as you can see here inside of this little box, which we can delete by pressing the delete key on any unwanted faces. Next we'll look into multiple extrusion operations. We can apply an operation to multiple objects, faces, by entering into a sub-object mode and pressing the extrude face, and that will extrude all of the faces outwards. So we have more faces, more brushes created from the faces we select, and again we can go in there and we can select each of these unwanted parts that nobody's ever going to see and delete them. Voila. No need to draw things we can't see, and if we need to restore them back, we can by, for the most part, we can just select the object in object mode and press Ctrl R in sub-object mode, and that should restore the faces we delete. Okay, we'll just simply highlight the use of one more general tool, which is the mirror tool. The mirror tool does exactly what it says on the tin. It mirrors the object that you create. The best object to use to demonstrate this would probably be a cone, which I'll create in the side view. And here, if I press the mirror button, which is right here, we select the axis, we look at the name of the viewport, gives us an indication of what axis we want to work with. In this case, I want to use the X axis, and voila, the image, the object has been mirror imaged. We can do it as many times as we like with the other axis options. Mirror Y, and your normals, your faces will always be left as they were, facing outwards. When you mirror image, we're not inverting the structure of the mesh, we're just reversing the transform and also keeping the outward faces facing outwards. To conclude, we'll create a quick little room and load it into the DBPRO engine. I'll increase the grid size and I'll create a floor in the center. I'll select the right tool first, the box. I'll raise the box up and increase its height. I'll use the hollow feature and set the wall size to 32. I'll enter into the little room. I'll create a new box to be used as a carving device. I'll raise it above the floor slightly. I'll decrease the grid size to make sure that it lines up nicely. I'll press the carve button and I'll delete the Boolean object. We now have an opening in the door. I'll come outside here and I'll select the entire scene so far using the shift and drag feature with the shift key held down, and I'll press Ctrl G to group. I will now create a new box over here. Make it nice and thin. We'll make a little table. We'll raise it up a little bit more, it's a little bit too wide, and we'll draw a leg over this side, and we'll duplicate that with the Control key held down and make a leg over here. I'll increase its size to touch the floor, and I'll decrease the depth of the legs. I'll lower the grid size down and drag down. I'll hold the Control key and duplicate some new legs, and I'll take a closer look in the 3D viewport and select all of the objects and group them so that I can drag them around. I'll place them in the room. I'll zoom out using the mouse wheel key, which you can also zoom in and out using the mouse wheel, whatever's most comfortable for you. I'll select something else for a texture. I'll perhaps go back to the, let's see, crates, and I'll select, oh, wrong option, crates. Select the wooden crate and apply. I'll select the top edge in object select mode and set the scale to about 0.25 by 0.25. In fact, 0.5 doesn't have to be perfect, and we'll leave In fact, what we'll do is we use the fit mode. Now we've distorted the structure of the texture, but in this situation I'm not really concerned with the quality of this scene. I'm just demonstrating how to use the different tools, and we'll create a little ceiling rose up here. I'll select that object in object mode so that 3DO Studio knows where to place this new thing, this new object, which will be a cylinder. In fact, I'll use a torus. I'll now deselect this object by clicking on the outside, and I'll create a torus right in the center with the grid size slightly larger. The torus is now created up here, but it's too thick. Let's change the thickness to about 16 and keep its size the same, and drag here, and I'll zoom in and I'll drag the sort of ceiling rose down, and I'll increase its size. I'll select some of its vertices. In fact, we'll leave the vertices because that's going to take forever. So you can see there's many possibilities of all of the generic tools. We're going to just simply load this into DBPRO by pressing the export option in the file menu, and we will select DBO and save as just room, and here we can just load the scene up in DBPRO. In fact, there's something I've forgotten here. Although our scene has been textured, it has not been lit. If I switch over into my textured plus lighting mode, the whole scene is dark, and this is exactly what we will see in the DBPRO engine. I'll go to the sports fiction entities or entities in your installation and insert a light. I'll place the light right about here, and I'll leave it with its default properties, raise it up a little bit more near the ceiling rose, and I'll press this button over here, render lights. I'll leave the default settings and render the scene. I'll not render the shadows, just want something quick, and that compiles over here. Close that, close that. Now let's have a look. Now the scene is lit. There's no shadows. However, we will be able to see what we have done in DBPRO. Let's resave that as room and load into DBPRO. Simply load objects, G drive, BM, SF files, mesh data, room.dbo. To loop the program, control the camera. Compile. Object number. Compile. And we can move around. Ooh, movement is too slow, too slow. I should have remembered that we're working at a large scale here, so next time when you do a quick demonstration of how your object looks in DBPRO, remember to set the movement to a faster, higher value. But as you can see, our environment has been passed and displayed quite nicely. Good. So I hope you've enjoyed this in-depth tutorial on the basics of the 3D World Studio program, the overview. If you'd like to see more tutorials, please recommend any topics that you would like to learn. If I have the time, I'll try my best to get some done. Any questions, post them up. Visit my website, go to my blog my dev blog on the TGC forums, visit some of my sponsored ads on my website if you want to help support my work. Thanks for your time anyway.